Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Monhamisi Singano. I work with WEDO as Director of Policy, but I also serve as a co-focal point of Women in Gender Constituency. We would like to welcome all of you to this scene-setting press conference from the Women in Gender Constituency. And this conference is really intending to set the scene of what feminists are expecting from COP29. For so long, feminists have been categorical in demanding the feminist future, the future where it's free from oppression, free from exploitation, the future where everyone has a life to live, life of dignity, the future where the safety of people and the well-being of people and planet is guaranteed. If we have to attain that future, every year we need to make a step towards that future. And it is on that background that the Women in Gender Constituency have expectation for this COP, because that future will not come from the air. We need to build, we need to set building block to achieve it. And together with me today, I have my colleagues who will share their expectations and demands from the Women in Gender Constituency so that we can, at the end of the day, attain the feminist future that we all want. So without further ado, because we have a very limited time, I'm joined today with my colleague, Wei, who will be speaking on WGC expectation on the Article 6, and also join my colleague Lian, who will be speaking on WGC expectation on finance, and followed by my colleague Gina, who will be speaking on WG expectations on justice transitions, and that Gina will be followed by Demet, who will be speaking on WGC expectation on adaptation. And last but not least, we'll have our colleague Rebecca, who will be speaking on WGC expectation on gender, specifically given this is the critical year of gender, with the new Lima Work Program expected to be endorsed and decided. So without further ado, I would like to welcome my colleague Wei.
Good morning, everyone. We strongly denounce the process so far regarding the Article 6.4. Especially the gavelling of the draft decision during the opening plenary that takes note of the adopted standards on removals and methodology by the Article 6.4 subsidiary body. We echo Tuvalu's intervention that this does not reflect party-driven process, and this trend should not continue in COP. Carbon offsets and trading are false solutions and dangerous distraction. Carbon markets are not climate finance. However, if the sustainable development mechanism of Article 6.4 is to go on, it needs to work on the standards, especially the activities involving removal standards. There's still a lot of extremely worrisome elements, and it's weaker than the Dubai tax. Before we leave COP, the CMA of the Article 6.4 should provide specific guidance, and this should be included in the draft decision so that the supervisory body of Article 6.4 can actually use this to work on the guidance, on the elements during next year's meetings. Those elements that we notice are the post-crediting period processes, especially including monitoring and reporting, safeguards and assessments related to that, and also the issue on reversal risk buffer pool. There's a lot of issue on it using MCUs, that is non-authorized Article 6.4 emissions reductions unit, which we think should not be used. And there's also a missing element on what's the responsibility of the host party role. This should be specifically mentioned in the guidance before we leave COP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wei, for detailed description of what WGC demands on the Article 6. Lian, if first you can start by introducing yourself, your position and where we work, but also everybody said this is the year of finance and a lot have been happening with finance. What did the WGC want to see happen this year at this COP?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Liana Schalatek. I'm with the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Washington, D.C., and a proud member of the Women and Gender constituency. So it's very clear we must have an ambitious, just, equitable, and effective new climate finance goal here, NCQG, you heard it. If we don't get it, nothing less than the future of the Paris Agreement is at stake, and with it, multilateralism of climate effort. But, and this is the important part, we are talking about hundreds of millions of lives of those that have contributed the least to the climate crisis and are impacted the worst, don't get the justice they deserve. So we need a drastic scale up in both the quantity and the quality of climate finance to meet the needs and priorities of developing countries, the goal of the Paris Agreement. Otherwise, and this is very important, gender equality cannot be achieved. Because when we see, for example, massive indebtedness in countries, and this is related to the quality of finance provision, we know that if countries lack the fiscal space, then investment in social features, in health and education is shortchanged, and that leaves women who are care providers at the end of the stick. So this is why we are starting calling out for the NCQG, not just with the number, everybody does that, but really looking at the qualitative effects that must be in place. And that starts with human rights and gender responsiveness, which must be at the heart of the NCQG, meaning the respect, promotion, and consideration of the rights of children and youth, women and gender diverse people, people with disabilities, workers, and indigenous peoples. And this must be part in the provision and delivery of the new goal. It's not enough to get a mention of gender, maybe in the context or in a preamble. We need those parts operationalized. And yes, quantum is important because, again, the quality and the quantum are interrelated, can't be separated. And while we know that the climate debt owed by developed countries to developing countries is in the trillions of commitments that should be paid yearly, here we are calling for at least 1 trillion in public provision from developed to developing countries. We reject efforts to undermine the principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. There is a continued obligation of developed countries to provide financing because it is them who have tracked the feet on missing climate action for the past 30 years. We are putting the call out for a public core of finance that needs to be fully grant financed for adaptation and for loss and damage. Loss and damage must be included in the new goal. And when people are saying there is no money there, there is no public money there, we know that we have excessive military spending. We had 2.4 trillion last year that was spent on finance. We know that many developed countries still spend more yearly on fossil fuel subsidies than they contribute in climate finance. There is a huge possibility for equitable taxation, just such like a wealth tax or a climate damages tax. We need to ensure that we have the finance to finance the just transition. We will hear about that more. And particularly, we need to ensure that the finance that we have, and this is the qualitative elements, is actually directly benefiting communities, the marginalized and disenfranchised groups. And just as a point of order, this means we need to come from country ownership to actually community and citizen ownership. It's not going to work anymore that we are saying, you know, climate finance will trickle down somehow. We know in economics it has not worked. It does not work in climate finance. And so we need targeted, intentionally efforts and a change, as I said, of the narrative to make sure that it's community that benefit for us. All of this has to be enshrined in transparency and accountability provision, because otherwise it's just empty words, and this must be related to a clear climate finance definition that very clearly calls out what cannot be called climate finance. We heard that must exclude carbon finance, but it must also exclude, for example, loans on market-based rates, or it must include efforts from export credit agencies, because those are clearly meant to just reflect back the financing to the countries that have contributed them in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leanne. I think you have quite detailed what we want. I think I don't have to summarize it, but we really need to look for the quality of finance, and it has to be public finance, as my colleague has said. Gina, Just Transition Work Program was agreed in the previous COP, and it started working. Can you share WGC demand, but also if you can also speak broadly the need to have gender-just transition in this COP?
Thank you so much, Mishi, and good day for everyone. So as the Women and Gender constituency, we would like to reiterate, and we will keep on reiterating, the need to move away from those growth-based, fossil fuel-based economic systems that are pushing us to that ecological collapse, that continue to militarize our realities, and that are also continue to fuel genocides in different regions. Because we have already surpassed 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries. And so far, it seems that parties in the rooms are not taking this seriously, with the urgency that is needed, to take actionable steps. So this is what we are making a call here. We have already started with conversations yesterday, and so far we are seeing at risk that if we do not take action, this is going to be more of a tax shop that is not going to serve those communities that this Just Transition Work Program should be serving. And for the Just Transition Work Program to be just, it must adopt an inclusive and participatory framework that center the rights of marginalized and vulnerabilized groups, and it must also at all recognize the role of the unpaid and paid care and domestic work that is carried by women in all the diversity around the world, which actually is playing an invisible subsidy to the current economy. This care and domestic work, that is what allows many other forms of work where actually our system and our economy is holding on. So this must also be accompanied by the comprehensive public engagement, by social dialogue, and as well by procedural justice that supports the communities in co-designing those policies that reflect those needs and solutions. This, of course, with the appropriate guarantees on the free, prior, and informed consent of communities, particularly of indigenous communities. And we would like to highlight as well that we have had in the past good exercises and examples on how civil society engagement in the process has been fruitful. We saw that happening during the second open dialogue, and we are as well making a call to parties for this to continue while we move forward. However, we as civil society, we want to be able as well to be part and participate meaningfully, and not just in a dialogue, but in the work program more broadly. So this is why, alongside with our constituencies, colleagues of Engo, Yongo, and Tongo, we have been calling for institutional arrangements in the work program that can guarantee exactly that participation from observer groups in the Just Transition Work Program. And the establishment of that advisory body is how we envision that this should work. It's actually as well how we envision some steps that governments and parties can show that they do truly interest for the integration of civil society in this space. And regarding international cooperation, the Women and Gender constituency supports as well the civil society recommendations that have been done for the UN panel on critical energy transition minerals, which has outlined 7 principles that can guide technology transfer, that can guide the flow of financial resources, different principles principles that are guiding and are centering the conversation on human rights, on gender responsive and gender transformative actions. And this should already be guiding the conversations here. And international cooperation, as what we have been discussing as well in other different tracks, this international cooperation needs to provide the funds that are needed to move away from those extractive systems. It cannot be in the form of debt. It cannot be in the form of increasing the burden of countries in the South, of those dependencies and that unequal exchange. This cannot be a repetition of the story of unfair trade rules that have been dominating the space and that have been plundering the countries of the South. So in responsibility and in voicing up, we are continue to advocate for a feminist just transition that looks not for the reproduction of capital, but for a life in dignity for all. Thanks, Mishu.
Thank you so much, Gina, for outlining clearly WGC demand on the just transition and also how just transition needs to be expanded to really center as well the care work that has been carried by majority women. The Met, the work on adaptation last year during the COP, we adopted global goal on adaptation, and there is other expanded agenda item on adaptation. What are the WGC demand on adaptation?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. This is Demet Intepe from Practical Action UK. I'm covering the adaptation agenda. So under the adaptation agenda, I will first highlight 3 important big picture issues and then quickly link it to the negotiations that are happening right now. So for adaptation, firstly, our first priority is elevating adaptation in the climate change agenda. UNEP's new adaptation gap report, which came out last week, says very clearly that climate adaptation can no longer be treated as a distant concern, but must be seen as one of the greatest priorities for nations along with greenhouse gas emissions. So under the climate change negotiations, we would like to see adaptation having equal weight as mitigation, and this isn't the case right now. Adaptation must be treated as a climate justice issue, and it needs to have its own standalone and permanent agenda item to ensure coherence and continuity in the work. So adaptation needs this political elevation because climate impacts are global, and we urgently need international support for countries so that they are able to determine how they need to adapt, what measures they need to take, and then implement those measures. My second point will be that this political elevation needs to be backed up by finance, going towards the most vulnerable of the world so that they can adapt to this new reality and address their losses and damages. In 2009, developed countries had agreed that they would collectively mobilize $100 billion per year by 2025 to support developing countries' climate action. But developed countries only met this 100 billion goal for the first time in 2022. So the finance that's flowing to those countries who have contributed the least to climate change but are suffering the worst impacts are far from adequate. And here we are discussing the new finance goal on adaptation. We would like this new financial goal to have an adaptation sub-goal, which means that we would like to see the different amounts pledged separately for adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage. The reason for this is that we would like to see these clear pledges that are accompanied by tracking mechanisms to ensure accountability on how these finance allocations are delivered. And my last point in the big picture would be supporting local level climate action with full incorporation of gender, youth, disability, human rights, and indigenous peoples' rights. These considerations should be cross-cutting across these agenda items and under adaptation, and they should translate, most importantly, into tangible policy and implementation efforts in country contexts. This link between the negotiations translating into policy is really important. We need to go beyond the tokenistic mentions of these considerations and discuss ways to meaningfully integrate them and support developing countries so that they can allocate the resources to translating this policy into practice. So very briefly on the COP focus, I will focus on just the two major negotiation items, the global goal on adaptation. The major issue for global goal on adaptation is the UAE Belan work program. And this work program on adaptation indicators measuring adaptation should be on track to provide concrete measures of support to developing countries. And we would like to see the gender considerations incorporated into this global measurement framework, which should allow for better and more gender-responsive adaptation implementation on the ground. And in national adaptation plans, these are about how to enable countries to determine and implement the adaptation actions they need. So they need the finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. And these should be considered as a package, and these should be under the global goal on adaptation and national adaptation plans decision texts as well. Our position is that we need to have a way to track what kind of support is flowing to developing countries, because developing countries have limited means to set up their physical infrastructure, coordinate national actors, and set up data collection systems. So gender decisions should be thoroughly integrated with clear provisions for advocating gender equality throughout the development, implementation, and reporting of the national adaptation plans. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Demet, for extremely detailed outline of WGC demand across different adaptation agenda items. So last but not least, I would like to welcome my colleague, Rebecca. After the 5 years of implementation of the Lima work program, the work implementation was in the final stages of being reviewed, and a new decision is expected during this COP. What's the demand and what's the state of play when it comes to gender agenda item?
Yes, thank you. So we know that the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution spares no one, but it disproportionately affects women and girls in all their diversity. Yet, when it comes to the climate conversation, they often remain out of the picture. And now I would like you to imagine the photo that was circulated yesterday of the world leaders attending COP29. The image is quite a bleak one, literally and figuratively, because statistically, only 8 out of the 78 world leaders participating in COP29 are women. At COP28, only 29% of heads of delegation were women, while overall women's participation did not even reach 40%. And this is not only unjust, but it's also unwise. In a feminist future, I imagine a starkly different picture. A photo that's less filled by men in black suits, but a colorful depiction that really reflects the incredible diversity of our worlds that we live in. However, a world where women, girls, and gender diverse people are fully and meaningfully included within climate decision-making is just a start. We envision a world where women and girls in all their diversity are finally recognized and supported as agents of change, catalysts of gender-transformative climate action, and stewards of their own fate. This is a world that's truly ready to face the climate crisis. The Enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender and its Gender Action Plan, or the GAP in short, are important vessels for ensuring that women and marginalized communities are not left out of the discussion or left out of the solution. Within the UNFCCC, it has put gender in the picture, becoming an essential tool for driving gender-transformative climate action. And because, yes, we know this is the COP of finance, but this COP is also the COP of gender. And we're glad to see that gender is slowly but surely making its way into the center of the frame. For example, in the very first hours of COP29, the EU launched a statement which declared that they will strive for a new work program on gender and gender action plan that are ambitious and fit for purpose. A statement that was supported by countries including Chile, Colombia, Iceland, Mexico, Norway, Tanzania, and the United States. However, as we enter the second day of negotiations, we want to reinforce what we expect from parties in the upcoming days. Our collective demands remain the same. The delivery of an ambitious work program and gender action plan, which should be intersectional, inclusive, measurable, cohesive, and funded. Because as the main driver of the gender agenda, the Enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender and its GAP have proven effective, as reflected by an increase in appointments of national gender and climate change focal points from 38 at the adoption of the GAP towards now 140, documented by February of this year. There's also been a progress in tracking participation of women in the UNFCCC decision-making processes, and an uptake in national gender and climate change plans, as well as capacity building programs for women from grassroots organizations and indigenous communities. And for those reasons and more, we cannot lose this momentum by having a gap between the gaps. We need a decision here at COP on the work program on gender and a clear roadmap that outlines concrete steps towards a gap. And this decision must be ambitious, transformative, as well as funded. And the good news is, we have enough time to get the shot right. We're only at the beginning of the gender negotiations at this COP. And with the second round of informals starting today, we call on all parties to rise to the critical occasion and work collaboratively to ensure that the work program on gender is not just renewed, but strengthened. We urge parties to seize the opportunity to give gender its rightful place in the picture. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for outlining those demands. I think for the press and colleagues who are here, WGC have came to this COP with a team of experts across all agenda items. And we did have outlined and make available to you the list of the spokesperson. We have colleagues leading different thematic work in all the main agenda items that have been negotiated this year. And my colleagues who are here, just some of those thematic leads who work on the different thematic areas. So it is also encouraged, and it's invitation to the press as well to reach out to the WGC if you need to have WGC perspective in a number of agenda items that have been negotiated. And all our work is centering on making sure we provide feminist lens and we link gender with a specific agenda item here. We have very few minutes. We might not be able to have questions from the audience unless there is one burning question from the journalist. I guess not. So I would now like to give my colleague just one sentence to say what should be the key takeaway, what must be delivered for this COP to be successful. Just one sentence. We can start with Gina.
To make a clear sign on transitions that are framed for a life in dignity for all with a gender responsive and intersectional lens.
Thank you. Demet?
One key thing for me, as I said, would be politically elevating adaptation in the agenda and absolutely backing this with the financial support that it needs towards developing countries and integrating the gender concerns.
Wei?
Article 6.4 mechanism, which is a Sustainable Development Mechanism, SDM, must not be a replicate or a worse model than the CDM of Kyoto Protocol. Thank you.
Thank you. Lian?
We need a new climate finance goal here, but we need one that is publicly sourced as a multitude of what we have with the 100 billion and is and basically has the qualitative features that we need so that we can make sure that the money reaches those that deserve it most and is human rights centered and gender responsive.
Thank you, Lian. Rebecca?
Yes. COP29 is the COP of gender, and it's high time that we give gender its rightful place in the picture.
Thank you so much. And with that, thank you so much. As WGC, we are here to demand a feminist climate justice, and we are here to make sure that this COP delivered what is expected. Millions of women, millions of young girls are carrying the brand of climate crisis on their back, and it's injustice for the issue around gender to be seen as an issue at the periphery. It has to be centered, as my colleagues say. This is the year of gender, and this is the year's finance. Let's make the public finance available so that we can use those communities that need those finance can use them to deliver the climate action that is so needed. So with that, thank you so much for joining us, and let's continue to demand feminist climate justice today and always. Thank you.